So yesterday we talked about software test life cycle. You can watch that. So today I want to discuss about test documentation and also like test cases, right? How to generate test cases and all that. Um, so basically the test documentation, like whatever documents are that gets created as part of the testing, right? So basically, test documentation is artifacts created before or during the testing of software, right? So it helps testing team to estimate how much effort is needed, what is the test coverage, resource tracking, like how many teams like involved in the testing, execution progress, right? So it's basically all the statistics about testing progress, right? So at different stages, we create different documents, like especially different suite of documents gets created. So that allow you to describe and document like test planning, test design. So test execution, test results, so that are drawn from testing activity. So all the like documents generated at different stages will be part of this test documentation. So we'll see what are all the documents that gets generated as part of testing. So these are some of the documents that gets generated. The first one is a test policy. Test policy is basically a high-level document. It describes what principles, methods, and what are the testing goals of the organization that's created. Right, this is basically some kind of a guideline. Right, each company will have a kind of a test policy. Like they'll have some standards defined, or they follow some international standards or principles. Right, it's very high-level document. What are the various standards that is followed inside the company, right? It's a generic document. The next document is the test strategy, right? This is basically high level document which identifies test levels to be executed, right? We have like different levels of testing, like unit testing, integration, system, user acceptance, and all that. So this defines what kind of testing levels will be done in the testing process. It's another high-level document. Mostly it's done by test managers or like development managers and all that. They involved in that, right? Then test planning. So test planning is a complete planning document which contains scope, approach, resources, schedule, etc. of testing activities. See, the testing strategy is like what kind of testing levels are done. The test plan actually defines what is the scope. Like, so if they take a project, so what are the things, what are the features we're going to test, what is the approach they're going to take, and what are the resources that will be working on the project. It's also team resources. Also, it will be hardware and software resources like systems and environments. And what is the schedule? Like, what is the testing team schedule? Like, when the testing will start, when it will finish, and what are the activities as part of testing, right? Creating these test documentation, like creating test cases, test scenarios, test execution. So all the activities will be documented in the test plan, right? Test plan is more detailed than test strategy. So it will have all the specific activities planned for the project, testing project. Right? That is a test plan. Then requirement traceability matrix. So this is a document which connects requirements to test cases, right? So you have like you receive like requirements in the beginning of the project. So from requirements, we connect to our test cases, test scenarios, and the test cases in turn will connect to test execution, right? Test execution reports. There will be like a follow connection between all these things. So that's called like a traceability. So that way we know like what requirements are covered in test cases, what requirements are tested and all that. So that is a requirement traceability matrix, right? Normally it's called as RTM, right? That's a popular word, right? Then test scenario. So test scenario is an item or event of a software system which could be verified by one or more test cases. So there is this is a common difference between common question, what is a test scenario and what is a test case, right? So test scenario is covers an event of a software system. So such as like if you're logging into a system, so login is a kind of a scenario, right? One scenario, but login can have like invalid login or valid login, invalid login, incorrect password and all. So those will come under test cases, right? So test scenario is verifying the login of the system, but test cases come are more defined, like logging with correct user and password, invalid username, invalid password, things like that. That is a test case, right? So basically, test case is group of input values, right? We'll specify like what is the input values, what are the preconditions, what is the expected execution and results. So that is a test case is developed for a test scenario. So we'll define high level test scenarios. From test scenario, we divide into test cases, right? Then we have like test data, right? For testing each of the test cases, we need some test data, right? So even if you take like a login scenario, so we need like valid username, valid password. We have to test with incorrect password. So that is all test data, right? We need to document all the test data as well. And finally, the defects, right? Whatever defects is found in the testing process, we need to document them. So there will be a defect report that is generated from the testing activities, right? Then the test summary report. So this is a summary report which will say what are the activities conducted and what is the outcome of the testing activities. Suppose we are doing like unit testing, integration, system testing activities. So each activity will summarize what are the things that are working, what is not working, what are open issues and all that we documented, right? So this is like different types of documentation done during testing process, right? From high level to low level. So sometimes if you're doing like you're a part of a testing team member, so we'll be generating these test scenarios, test cases, test data, defect report, and all that. If somebody like a team lead or test manager, they'll be creating test strategy, test plan, and maybe test summary report once testing activities are completed, right? So those are different documentation that are created in the testing process. So why we need like so much documentation in the testing, right? So what is the point creating so many documents? These are the things, right? So we just want to remove like manual errors and so even if we are creating like testing like say 100 to 200 test cases, we don't remember like how many passed, how many failed unless we track them, right? So we cannot remember which is passed, which is failed. So by creating this systematic documentation, if somebody asks like what is the testing you did and what is the results, so you can simply share this document and so they will be able to verify that what is the testing done on that application and how is the results, right? So our main goal is to show that the testing is completed and actual results. So the documentation is very important in testing process, right? So that's why, so these are some of the advantages. The main reason is to create test documentation is either to reduce or remove any uncertainties about the testing activities. So we know like we did all the testing activities, but somebody outside the testing team, how they will know? Like only through this documentation only they will know like, okay, these are the testing activities done and these are like open issues or these are the functionality that is working. So that testing documentation is very important, right? So it's a documentation not only offers a systematic approach to software testing, so it also acts as training material to freshers in the software testing process, right? So if we are like newly joining into some existing testing team, so this documentation will be a guide, like a training material for you to pick up on what is happening in the team, right? So they may already have like test plans or test cases generated, right? They probably have some reports generated or existing defects. So this will act as a guide for somebody who is starting fresh in the testing team, right? It's also good for marketing and sales strategy um, to showcase test documentation to exhibit a manual, mature testing process. So this also gives some confidence to clients and all, right? We have these standard procedures and documentation on the testing. So when client sees this kind of documentation, they will feel more confident on the product quality and all, right? It improves your quality, offers a quality product to the client within specific time limits because you are following a strategy. So there won't be any confusion who is doing what, right? So there will be clearly defined documentation and all that. So it basically helps improve transparency with the client, right? So client will be more clear on what is happening in the project and updates, latest updates. So what do you think? These are the advantages. So there is some disadvantages also, right? So because we are creating so much documentation, it's probably time consuming, right? It's going to take more time, right? Just testing is easy, but if you have to document everything, it's going to take some time. It will be time consuming. So sometimes some people are good at testing, but they may not document very much. So that's another drawback, right? So so you need to understand the system as well to write good documentation. So that's why the English, right, communication skills and writing skills are important for testing, right? Sometimes developers don't write many documents, so testers will be writing the documents. So it's important we write proper documents, and so we should avoid like spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, and all. So you can use like spell checker, grammar checking, and all that while writing documents, right? So because we are testing team, we should not make mistakes in the documentation. That is very important, right? So keeping track of changes requested by client and updating corresponding documents is tiring. Sometimes the changes are keep on coming. So if you have to update these documents, it takes some time, and there may not be enough time to like update all the documents. So it depends on the project and how strictly they are following these guidelines. So, so sometimes if there is an urgency, so we may skip some things, but we need to update these documents at regular intervals, right? So, so this is another drawback. If you are doing documentation, but if you are doing like purely poor quality documentation, right? So if you have like mistakes or you're missing some requirements or missing some test cases in the documentation, So that will reflect badly on the client, right? So you have to manage these things as well, right? So ideally, you want to like document all these things, but in the real world scenario, because of time and changes and all, there will be like some mismatch. But so you need to maintain this documentation for proper testing process and all that, right? So this is very important. Sometimes people like so the development team probably don't want this documentation and all, but testing team should insist, right? We need this documentation for proper tracking and all that stuff. So that is importance of test documentation. So then we'll look into the testing activity, like how to generate test cases. So if you have requirements coming from business analyst, right? So generating test cases is an art, right? So it has different techniques how to generate test cases. So normally we can think of usual scenarios, but if you follow some testing techniques, right? There is test case design techniques that are available. So if you follow them, you improve your testing coverage, right? You verify different conditions, boundary conditions, negative conditions, right? Where the application probably will fail, right? We're going to generate different scenarios based on the testing techniques, test case design techniques, right? So basically, a simple definition of test case is, right, it contains steps, test data, precondition, post condition for a specific test scenario to verify any requirement. So any test case should contain all these things, right? It needs a test steps, test data, precondition. Precondition means what are the things required before we can run this test case, right? So post condition, what is the output from this test case, right? And which requirement we are tracking with this test case, right? So it will include specific variables, conditions, so using which test engineer can compare expected and actual results to determine whether software product is functioning as per the requirements of the customer. So all these things should be part of the test case, right? So input conditions, precondition, post condition, test data, and all that. Right? We have like sample test cases. I will show you that. So like there is always this confusion, like what is a test scenario and test case. So as I explained, test scenario is a little high level and test case is more defined, right? So here if you see like something like a login, right? So if you call it as a test scenario, check login functionality where there are many possible test cases. So check login functionality is a test scenario, and under that you'll have like three different test cases, right? Check results on entering valid user ID password, then entering invalid user ID and password, and check response when user ID is empty and login button is pressed, right? These are some examples, but we can expand like so if user ID is entered and the password is left blank, right? Those kind of things, right? So understand this difference between test scenario and test case. This is a very common question that people will ask, right? So let's look at a simple login page and let's see what are the test cases that are possible for this scenario. So this basically just input is email address and password and sign in button, and there is a forgot password. So I will just show you sample scenarios and just walk you through this one. This is a Word document. So basically, we saw that login function, right? There's a different test cases that are possible, right? So the first step is like a simple test case to explain the scenario. So check response when valid email and password is entered, right? This is basically the first scenario, right? So we are entering valid email password and verifying it. So that is the test case description. Then what is the test data, right? So we'll put like some valid email and password, right? So this is like a simple scenario. So we can easily create like a test data, but sometimes creating test data is time consuming. Like it's a bigger application, so it takes some time to create this test data. Then so step 2 is basically creating test data. So step 3, so in order to execute test case, so we need to perform a specific actions on the AUT. AUT is application under test, right? They give you application, so we need to do some steps, right, before we execute it. So what are the things we need to do? That is the test steps, right? So we enter email address, enter password, right? These are the steps. This is the test data. Email, actual value of the email, actual value of the password, and login button. Click sign in button, right? So this is the test steps. Right, you go like one by one. Like first you write a description, then you can prepare test data, then you write test steps. And so once test steps are done, like these test steps will be depends on the scenario, like test case you are creating. So sometimes it will be simple, sometimes you may have like multiple steps, right? So but make sure like each test case comes as a very single functionality. We don't want to like test complicated functionality in one test case. If this is complicated, we divide that into multiple test cases, right? And step 4 is what is the expected result, right? We need to write what should happen after clicking on the sign in button, right? So login should be successful, right? So that is the expected result. Then the that is 4 steps we got. Like we have like some test case number, test case description, test data, and expected result. Then we're going to execute the test, right? Then we'll check like next expected result with the actual result. So we'll say like expected result and actual result and pass or fail, right? So there will be like 6 columns, right, in each test case, right? And sometimes you may have like preconditions, like what are the things that needs to be ready before you can execute the test case. But these are the basic test case columns, right? So basically, as I said, like there can be preconditions, right, that needs to be available before we can run the execute the test case. So you may have like some browsers installed. Like we are testing like a web application, you need to have like maybe Chrome browser or Firefox or Safari, right? Or if you're testing on mobile devices, you need to have that access to the hardware. Like that, there will be some post conditions as well. But this is a simple test case creation process, right? So what are the things we need in a test case, and what we need to cover in a test case, right? So I will upload this document also into that lessons, so you can check this document. And there is a test, there is Excel document which is sample template also. So I will upload that, so you can view that template as well for test cases. Let me show you the template. So this is like a sample template for one test case, right? So for each test case, we're going to track with some unique ID, right? So there's some unique ID you can create for each test case. And what is the test case description? Who created it, right? Who reviewed it? So if there's a multiple team members, so there will be a reviewer also, and kind of a version number to track changes, right? So there is new functionality, we'll increase the version number and track it, right? So there will be review, comment log, right? And then who tested it, right? Who created the test case and who tested it, what time, what date it is tested, is it pass, fail, right? And the prerequisites, suppose this is a browser functionality, so you need to have access to the Chrome browser, right? And what is the test data, right? And basically the test scenario, right? What we are doing in this test case, and the test steps, step details, expected result, actual result, pass, fail, or not executed. So this is like one simple template of a test case. So all these things are need to be maintained, right? So even though like so if you are test login, just enter user ID, password, and click sign in. If it logs in, it will work. But writing this document takes more time than actual testing, right? But we need the documentation to show the proof, right? That scenario is tested. Right? That's why the documentation is very important. So like each company, they will have their own formats and all. If they don't have any formats, you can start using these formats to create your test cases, right? So right here we showed like this is a kind of a longer version of test case. So you can make it like one column with different headers so that you can maintain all of them in all test cases in one sheet. So this one, like each sheet has one test case. It's a longer version of this test case. So you can like make it like into one row, all the headers, and create test cases. If you want to do that way, right? So this is a generic template of test cases, right? So is it clear? Like what is a test case and what are the things that go into this test case templates? Right? Okay. Let's go back to that presentation. So what we saw is like a test case example and template. So I'll just upload this to that. Tester log is basically like what are the activities done when they execute the test, right? So sometimes the test cases will be repeated for multiple times, right? So each time they execute the test case, so they will put some comments or what they are done in that iteration, right? So sometimes the test case will be repeated multiple times. So if there is a fixes or issues found during testing, so they're going to log some comments or what is happened in that iteration and all that. So that is it.
In defect tracker, sir.
Yeah.
Why in test that tester's log should be in defect tracker, sir?
No, can I speak louder? It's not clear.
Tester's log is there, no, sir?
Ah.
I mean, audible, sir.
It's basically the activities like say when they did the login, suppose say they are testing the login. First time they log in, like when so even if they enter correct user ID password, if didn't log in, right? So they're going to log that in the comments, right? and so next time they fix it. So when they test it works, then they log it, like just kind of a tracking, like what is happening for the test case um, with the time, like kind of a timestamp and what happened. So if they did like 3 times login test, so what happened in the first time and what happened in the second time, like that. It's kind of a log, right? So this is some of the things we need to keep in mind while writing. No, defect tracker is the issue log, right? It's like the final issue that is logged into defect tracker. But testers log is, suppose you are say testing the login screen. You probably spent like 2 hours testing the login screen, right? So maybe a test manager will ask like, what are you doing like testing the login screen for 2 hours, right? This log you can say like, say the first release has issues. Maybe you are talking to developer, explaining that issue, right? So it's kind of like what is your activity during the testing process. Defect tracking, we just log the issue and steps, but we don't actually log all these things. So you may be talking to developer and trying to see what is the problem and things like that. This is general, it's kind of like a general comments or things you're spending time on, right? You just log it there. But actual issue will go into the defect tracker, that is different. Yeah. So we're going to restart this Zoom meeting. I think time is up. Let me stop and I will restart in a couple of minutes. Okay, so what are the things we need to keep in mind while writing a test case, right? So these are some of the things you need to keep in mind while writing it. So it should be simple, right? So the test case should be simple and easy to execute, right? So keep end user in mind, like, so you should think like how the actual user will do the testing. So you need to keep that in mind while you writing the test case, and you should avoid repetition, right? So you should not have like same functionality in multiple test cases, different test cases, right? You should avoid that. So you should not assume anything. Um, like sometimes some behavior how the users will use will be different than what we normally think, right? So you should not assume anything. So you should read that requirements properly and then create the test cases, right? And ensure 100% coverage. It should be easily identifiable, right? So we're going to track with some kind of a serial number for each test case. So whenever we are talking, so we'll refer to that serial number and all that. So we're going to use the testing techniques. So I will explain these techniques. What are the testing techniques we need to use for generating test cases? So self-cleaning, repeatable, and peer review, right? Peer review is like, so when you write test cases, you should ask somebody in your team to review that test cases. So that way, so we'll try to avoid any mistakes in the test case and all that. So if it is a one-man team, that's we can skip that. But if there's like multiple team members, we should always do the peer review. So these are some of the things we need to keep in mind while writing test cases, right? So you should keep that in mind. Like when you follow the templates, generally those things are taken care of, but you can still like come back and check if you are doing this or not. Suppose if your test case is getting too complicated, you should divide that into multiple test cases, things like that. right? So what are the things we need to include in the test case? So anyway, I showed the template. What are the things we need to include? So basically, these are the steps, description of what requirement is being tested, right? Explanation of how the system will be tested, right? Test setup, like software, data files, operating system, hardware, and all that. Time of the day, prerequisites, right? So inputs and outputs and actions and expected results, any proof of attachments. So once your testing done, so we want to add some proof, maybe screenshots, like a small video or things like that. We need to add some proof that this scenario is tested and working, right? So the test case should not be more than 15 steps, right? So you don't want like, this is just a guideline. It's not like hard and fast rule, but your test case should be, maximum should be within 5 to 10 steps. So you should be able to complete the test case, right? So if it is more than that, that means your test case is too complex, and probably you need to divide that into multiple test cases. So if you're doing automation, that is a different requirement, like what are the inputs, what is the purpose, and what is the expected result. If it is you're going to automate the test case, you need to document that, and what are the prerequisites, and with other tests, it should be in correct business scenario order. It should be in the correct scenario order. So suppose you are executing multiple test cases, it should be in a particular order, right? This test case. So these are the some of the things so we need to take care of during the test case creation, right? So it's the same thing, like should be simple and transparent. Create test case with end user in mind. Avoid test case repetition. Like whatever is explained in this like image, so it's documented, so you can just read it. So once I upload this, so what are the best practices? Like don't assume, ensure 100% coverage. So test cases should have unique identifiers, right, to track with the defects. So when you're raising defects, you're going to give like test case ID as a reference, so that so the development team know like what test case created this defect, and they can link to the requirement at a later stage, right? These are various. So implement testing techniques. These are some of the testing techniques while generating test cases. So these are like standard methods we need to follow. Like there's a boundary value analysis. So it's basically a technique that defines testing of boundaries of specified range values. Yeah, it's probably network on your side, because there is no problem for other people. So other people are able to hear clearly. So I will anyway upload that video so you can watch that video, right? So that's the boundary value analysis. So you're going to test the boundaries of specified range of values, and equivalence partition. So these are the testing techniques. I will go into more deeper, but you can just understand the names. This is like technique where partitions the range into equal parts or groups that tend to have same behavior. So I will explain these in the later presentations, right? Then state transition technique, right? And error guessing technique. So this is basically anticipating where the error will occur in the application, right? There's no formal technique, but it's kind of based on somebody's experience and knowledge of the application. So they can generate error scenarios. So we'll go into deeper later on with these testing techniques. So this is also same thing, self-cleaning, repeatable, peer review and all that, right? So these are various test case best practices. So you can just review this document later on. And so for all these, for maintaining all these things, we need like some kind of test case management tools, right? So like if you have to keep track of these things in Excel files or Word files, it will be too long. Hopefully, if it is a smaller project, it's okay. But if it is a bigger project, it's not easy to keep track all these documents, right? So that's why we have like test case management tools, right? So something like Jira or Quality Center, these are some of the popular management tools. So they will enable easier tracking of these test cases and test scenarios, defects and all that, right? So basically what are the features in the test case management tools is, so you can easily document the test cases, right? And you can execute them, you can record the results, right? So in the tool itself, we can run the test case and update the results, right? So automatic defect tracking, right? If something fails, you can directly log a defect there, linking to your test case, right? So it's easier to track defects, and you can directly assign to the developer, and probably send email notifications as well to the developer that this issue is raised, right? Then there is the traceability, right? We are talking about this traceability matrix, right? So these tools will enable tracking of this requirements tracing. So requirements, test cases, execution of test cases. So they're all linked. So this tool will enable this tracking and all. Protecting test cases, right? So these test cases should be reusable, should be protected from being lost, right? So we cannot have like these test cases stored in some document and we lose that document or things like that. So these test cases will do some kind of version control, so that even if you if you lost some updates or something breaks in the system, they can access from other systems, right? So it will enable easier maintenance of test cases and all that, tracking defects, tracking linking defects, linking with requirements and all that. So some of them, there's popular tools like Quality Center and Jira are most common tools that are used for test case management. Okay, I think this is the same slide. So this is test case design documents, design techniques, right? So I explained these techniques, right? Boundary value condition and all that. So that we can discuss in this test case design techniques,